Hello, my friends, and welcome back. I'm very excited. Today, we have a friend of mine. Well, we've become friends over the last few years. Kim Almas is with us, and Kim is a 10-year veteran teacher. She is the mother of two boys in their 20s now. Was a longtime homeschooler after teaching in the public school system, and now she works as an evaluator in the states of Florida and Colorado. And we'll talk about the evaluation option for the states that do accept evaluations in lieu of national testing. So with that, Kim, thank you so much for coming on today. I'm very excited to have you on our podcast and introduce you to everybody.
Thank you for having me. Been looking forward to it.
Well, let's begin at the beginning, because you started in the classroom as a teacher. So let's talk to that just a little bit. Why did you get into education? And let's talk about your teaching experience for a little bit.
Sure. I think it's funny, thinking back, I really knew I wanted to be in education from a small child. Like, I was 4 years old in preschool myself. I knew I was supposed to be a teacher. Sometimes you just know, not everybody does, but I just knew. I dabbled in business briefly in college, but I knew it wasn't for me. I loved school. I loved I loved learning. I loved the whole thing. I wasn't necessarily an extrovert, like the kind that went out and got involved in all the activities. I loved the academics of it and just the environment, and just super comfortable with that. So I just always enjoyed that. And then in high school, I found out that homeschooling was a thing. And I thought, well, my goodness, I want to do that, because I just loved learning so much. I just wanted to just shoot forward and do that. And at the time, my parents had me in a nice, really good Christian school, and they were very pro-Christian education. They wanted me to continue in with that, and so that's what I did. But I always tucked that away as kind of a, boy, this is a really good option for some people, down the road. So tucked it away. In college, became an education major, and for one of my final projects, I did it on homeschooling, because I just constantly was fascinated with the idea. Well, then I got married, and for a while I worked in the classroom, because again, I loved teaching, I loved the environment, and didn't have kids yet. So, because we waited a while to have our kids, and I loved it. I had a great school experience. I had wonderful families. I had super administrators, principals, very supportive. And then every once in a while, homeschoolers would come across my path. And like, if I had extra curriculum, the school was just going to throw away anyway, or if they just needed some support, or they were heading from the classroom back in, or vice versa, from homeschooling back into my classroom. I just tried to be as supportive as I could with these families, and just had an overall good experience. And then after a while, you decide, I love teaching other people's kids, but now I think I want to teach my own. So we decided to start having our family, and always I tucked that away in the back of my mind, and knowing kind of having studied homeschooling academically, sort of from the outside, it's a little bit different from actually being a homeschool mom, right? Can I get an amen, right?
Amen.
So when my oldest was just a couple of months old, my former principal had just left the school right before me, and we're good friends to this day. And she had gone into one of the first charter schools for homeschoolers in California, in the Sacramento area. It's still very large, very well known. And she said, Kim, all you got to do is, it's just a little side gig for you if you want a little extra money. I said, okay, working with homeschoolers? That's great. She said, all you got to do is you go to their homes and you look at their curriculum, talk to them, give them encouragement, pick up their attendance sheets. Super simple at the time. Because again, this was brand new. This was a foot in the door at the time. And so I did that, and I really enjoyed it. And it was a wonderful stepping stone for me, looking back in hindsight, because I was able to work with pre-K through 12th grade. I could see all these different kinds of curriculum that people used, all these different learning styles, different teaching styles, kids who were struggling learners or advanced, how do you work with all of these things? So it's an excellent opportunity that I'm very, very grateful for. And I was there for about 2.5 years before I thought, no, I think I'm just going to be a mom, But
Mm-hmm.
but backtracking just a little bit, even at the school that I worked at, they were very supportive. It was a private Christian school, and they provided opportunities for me to go and take classes to be able to better support my struggling learners in my classroom. So lots of experience
That's
with that
awesome.
as well. And so, your podcast is school to homeschool from from the kids' point of view, but also from the teacher's point of view, right? Because my kids didn't really experience going to a classroom, and when they were young, at
Yeah.
least, it was more me. I had to make that paradigm shift. So that's kind of the real
Yeah.
quick synopsis of the background.
I think it's interesting because even though my kids did go to a they went through public school from the time they were in preschool. Um, I found that their ability to shift into homeschooling was far easier for them than it was for me, especially having been in the
Yeah,
classroom and having that all of these things in my head of what education should look like
right.
versus what it really could be. And then I did the transition of, oh, and then I had those, magical thoughts of we could do this. And then reality hit when I try to
I know.
implement what I thought it all should look like.
Oh my
And
goodness, I know. Could talk about that for days, honestly. Um,
so, and you taught fourth grade
Mostly fourth
in the school
grade. I
system,
loved it. It's
mostly.
such a great age. They know how to hold a pencil, and you can have these great conversations. It's just a great, wonderful age. Yeah.
So then what, okay, so as you started, you leave the classroom, you do that transition phase with the charter school. Let's talk a little bit about then your journey uh, as you start teaching your own kids. What were some of the challenges that you found, as well as like the different philosophies you may have tried?
Right. So initially, when they're tiny, tiny, you're just really playing games with them, playing with them, reading. I was okay with that. I was pretty good with that. It was when they got to be a little bit older, like my oldest was about, well, pre-K age, about four-ish. Um,
Hmm.
Somebody gave us some really quality curriculum, and I thought, okay, this is great. I'm familiar with this. Let's go for it.
Hmm.
I had good support from my friends who were still teaching at those lower grades, and I said, okay, let's just give this a whirl. And so I took my 4-year-old to the kitchen table, and we tried to
Hmm.
do these workbooks and all of the flashcards and all of the things. And meanwhile, my 2-year old was in the living room, and I plopped him down in front of a leapfrog video. I don't know if you remember those. And
I do remember
I'm
those.
pretty sure that's how he learned to read, watching the videos. And guess which kid probably had a better time learning how to read, it was like simultaneous. So it's kind of funny. So then during that time period, we moved from California to Colorado. And I
Hmm.
thought, oh, okay, this is it. Now we're heading into kindergarten. I have a 3-year-old, I have a 5-year-old, and so let's get serious about this. And so I took everything I knew about a kindergarten, what it looked like, stuck it in a
Hmm.
box, brought it home to my house. I mean, I had the bulletin boards. I had, the morning time where count the days and pop the balloon and all the things you do in kindergarten, all that stuff. And little boys can't, little kids, little ones, they can just be squirrely, right? And so they were like, yeah,
Hmm.
this is fun for 5 minutes, Mom, but now we're we're done,
We're done.
so moving on. I was like, what is happening? And so that was a little bit confusing. I had to take a step back, and looking at myself, I've really done this many, many times over the years. I've had to step back, reevaluate every time things started going south or sideways
Hmm.
in my homeschool. I realized it was because I was trying to duplicate the classroom. And
Hmm.
sure, there's a time and a place where you can pick and choose. I learned over the years, like you can use curriculum as a spine, right? You can use it if it's quality. But maybe your child doesn't learn the same way that you do. Maybe they learn completely differently, and maybe they're hardwired to do completely different things. So there was a learning curve for me at first. And that first fall, I had gotten involved in the MOPS group at my church. And I had
Mhm.
requested to be at a table with other homeschool moms. And we were kind of acquaintances. But by November, I was just like, oh my goodness, this is terrible. Max hates this. I hate this. Max is my oldest. And I prayed. I said, Lord, if you want me to keep homeschooling, I'm just going to stop. I'm going to do nothing right now. And if you want me to keep homeschooling, I really need some answers. And in January, if nothing changes, I'm going to put these kids, or Max, my oldest, into
Mhm.
the local school, and I'll just be a really good room mom, you know. And
Mhm.
the last MOPS meeting in November, I kind of shared, I opened up a little bit more, which I have found is really important in the homeschool world, right? Let's be vulnerable with each other. Let's help each other out. Let's share. And I was, and a couple of gals there said to me, they said, well, why don't you just come over after group today? If you can just go grab some peanut butter and a loaf of bread, bring it over. Here's my address. One of them gave me the address, and we got together and they talked me out of the tree. And these are just
Hmm.
regular gals, other moms, right? They hadn't
Yeah.
been in the classroom very much. I think one had been a preschool teacher at one point, but they said, here's what you got to do, Kim. They said, just set it all aside. Go back and read the book, Better Late Than Early, by Dr. Raymond and Dorothy Moore, who have since passed away. And then books by Ruth Beechick. And now there are some other really terrific books out there. I think I've heard Teaching from Rest is very good, and there's some other ones. Um,
Mhm.
but at the time, I'm telling you what, it was a complete paradigm shift for me.
Mhm.
I had stopped everything. I had been deschooling. I don't even know if that was a word back then, but I was deschooling the month of December, enjoying my
Mhm.
kids, getting to know these other homeschool families who now were like lifelong friends. Um,
Mhm.
and everything changed. Everything changed.
Mhm.
And from then on, like I said before, every time we started getting a little like, oh, do we still like homeschooling? I would stop and think, I think I'm letting curriculum drive the bus. I think I'm letting my teacher experience, rule the day, when really I need to step back. And yes, I'm a teacher, but I'm also a mom and a mentor and a coach, and I'm raising um, children. I'm raising human beings. I'm raising adults, not just I have a class of students. So it was really, that was a turning point for us, a watershed moment.
I love it. So what did your homeschool start to look like back then
Then,
after you made the
yeah,
shift?
I still was really, let's say, I was still very comfortable with using curriculum for especially math and language arts because those are so foundational,
Mhm.
right? But I wasn't as concerned about, oh my goodness, we have to do one lesson every single day, which I kind of
Mhm.
knew, it's okay from the classroom, from being in the classroom. I knew, yes, you can skip a lesson if the students know it. Yes, you can do fewer problems on the page. I did know that, but I think I was giving myself so much more grace than I had before, because
Hmm.
as a former teacher, I don't know if you felt this, but it feels like a spotlight is on you. Like if
Yeah.
you must do it like 100%, awesome, or I don't know. There's just so much pressure, I think. And
Mhm.
so I started not worrying as much about having social studies and science curriculum in the lower grades. If I had it, I only used it as the spine, and then I would look at the table of contents, sometimes just online, and then go to the library and get books that would support. Okay, generally speaking, you want to learn about Colorado history in fourth grade. So how are we going to do that? And kind of made those kinds of things up. Focus a lot on reading. Always did the reading, programs and contests and things like that. Math, we had some hiccups, I'll be honest. I could never quite get exactly what I was super, super happy with. We tried several things. Um, but I learned to be okay with that, to just kind of roll with it, try to find what would work for them. And by the time they got to high school, then they sort of transitioned into doing some dual enrollment. And so they picked up their math really at the college. But there are programs that are available to homeschoolers that the college was using. So one of them is called
Hmm.
Alex Math that was out there. I think Khan Academy at the time was good too. So anyway, yeah. So, but in the younger years, I focused more on really the basics, and then let
Hmm.
everything else just be uh, gravy. Just icing on the
Yeah.
cake. So had a lot more fun with it, and no more designated classroom area in your house. That's Yeah, that's not a thing for
I
us. It wasn't.
I always check that. Like, I was worried about that when we started.
Yeah,
I'm like, okay, this is gonna be the
yeah,
spot. But at the same time, I was like, but I don't want to put a chalkboard or a whiteboard in my dining room. Like and now I watch the Instagram moms that are like, this is my cute homeschooling room
I
that looks
know.
just like my old classroom. And I think, okay, their kids aren't very old
Yeah,
yet. Just wait,
yeah, yeah.
because my teenagers are like, I'd rather lay down and
I,
read my book than
honestly, I have pictures of them sitting upside down reading their books,
yeah,
literally on their heads.
doing their stuff. Well, and they want to be more comfortable anyway. I mean, that's how I prefer to
Who
learn.
doesn't, right?
So,
Yeah, who doesn't? Yeah.
so what did you find were some of your biggest challenges in when you got into some of the older grades? Because I hear from a lot of parents that are really concerned about high school, which was so funny because I feel like it's been easier than my younger child that I've one in middle school and then one that's in third grade this year, and she's never gone to public. Well, she went to a public preschool, but otherwise she's never been to public school. And to me, it was more daunting teaching her to read
Mm,
than it is saying to my high schooler, here's some things that you need to get done so that we meet state requirements.
right.
And they're like, okay,
Yeah.
I just did the things.
Right.
What were your challenges in high school
Yeah.
for the kids?
Yeah. For high school, it was probably the science, because I knew I really wanted them to have a science with a lab. And it's not that I
Mhm.
couldn't do it, but I thought if there's somebody else better equipped, then I would like to find them. And even things like writing and the higher math. And so at the time, we
Mhm.
were involved in both an umbrella school there in the North Denver metro area. So that was very
Mhm.
helpful. These are other homeschool moms that come in and play to their strengths. So I think that you know, there's always that thing about, socialization, blah, blah, blah. But really, we do need community, right? And we do need to help each other
Right.
out. And that's okay. So we were very fortunate, very blessed to know some other moms and sometimes dads, that this was their skill set. And so I got some help with that. And then this umbrella school that we were working with had a list of requirements, and it wasn't super crazy or anything, but how many math credits you should have and so on in order to graduate with a transcript from this umbrella school, because umbrella schools are technically private schools, right? So a private school transcript
Right.
is kind of a big deal. It's super helpful. It really was for my son that went over to college in Japan. So that was very helpful. But anyway, regardless, that gave us a guideline. And so, which over the years now, as I've been working with different families, I always say to my families, start with the end in mind. What does your child want to go into? Do they, like one of your kids, doesn't need to go to college necessarily, or to get the skills that he wants to get into his career? Some kids do, some kids don't. If you're going to go into nursing, maybe you have a different story
You're
there,
going to go to
right?
college.
You kind of need to jump through the hoops. So you start with the end in mind and you kind of work backwards. And so I used those guidelines both from my umbrella school and then also from the colleges that they were interested in. I contacted them and I said, for example, my younger son, he's going into computer science. Does he need for sure to have 2 years of foreign language on his transcript? And at this particular college for that major, the answer was no, which was great because it freed us up to focus more on what he did need to pursue what he was interested in. So it was very interesting. It was very, most of my experience had been with younger kids, so there definitely was a learning curve, but we had good support and we leaned into that. And then, one of my kids was ready and wanted to go do dual enrollment at the local junior college. The other one said to me, "I'm not ready, Mom." And I said, "Okay, that's fine. Let's do you." And he ended up later on doing some, kind of taking a gap year, did some traveling overseas on his own, and has done really, really well. So you just look at your kids. Oh, and that child, he said to me, he had already done 2 years of science with a lab, and it was time for chemistry. And he said, "Mom," and I had him enrolled. We had the book, everything. He came to me and he said, "Mom, I'll do this if you really, really want me to, because that's the kind of kid he is." And he said, "But what I really want to do is keep studying Japanese a lot harder." That was his passion.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
I thought, wow, all the experts, right? They say, "Oh, your child needs to have at least 3 sciences with lab and 4, maybe even." And I thought, no, this is my child. This is his life. What am I doing? This is one of the beauties of homeschooling, right? You get to help them follow their path. And I said, "You know what? You're right. That's fine." So I pulled him out of that chemistry class, and flash forward, he lives in Japan today, lives, works, and graduated from college in Japan, got married anyway. So yeah, so it's just kind of
That's so
fun
cool.
to see it play out. And that's another thing I like to say to families is trust the process. There are some things that you hear over the years from the parents, the homeschool parents that have gone before you, and they've got these little tidbits, these little nuggets of wisdom, and you just hang on to those and you trust that process. That's one of the things that I really like to emphasize with my families, even if it doesn't look like, I don't know, seems a little scary at the time. Like, really, they don't need 4 years of science with lab? Are you sure? Maybe not. Maybe not.
Well, I think it's interesting too, because I remember when I came out of the system, that was something that I was really concerned about, because my two oldest that were homeschooling, my actual oldest two children had graduated already,
Yeah.
but I was worried about, okay, they're going to need, what do they need to graduate, and are they going to have gaps in their education? But the truth is, everybody has gaps.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we all have gaps in our education, and I love what Dr. Peter Gray had said in his book Free to Learn, as he said, there's so much information in the world that you can only learn a small sliver in a lifetime. So why do we all have to learn the exact same sliver?
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
There's it's the world is so rich with so many things. Why can't we
Yeah.
follow our passions and be okay that if they do have to learn something, they'll figure it
Yeah.
out, you
Exactly.
know?
100% agree. And that's the other thing I like to tell, another thing I like to tell my families is we want our kids to love learning and to know
Mhm.
how to learn what they want to learn.
Yes. And are they, and can they be capable of learning something on their own and
Yeah.
finding the answers if they need
Right.
it?
Right. Independence.
That's it. Another thing that I've thought about over the years, like since we started homeschooling, was I used to work at the beginning of our homeschooling journey. I used to worry about like testing, and they've got to be tested, and they've got to go through these things. And is there a place for tests? Yeah, they're going to have to take the SATs and ACTs if they want to go to college. And there's times that they're going to have to do testing, but um the reality, okay, I can't remember what I was going to say, so never mind.
That's okay.
I just went blank. It was along the veins of testing. Oh, that they'll figure they'll. I'm more concerned now with, are do they know how to learn,
Right.
and find things. But when we test, this is where I was going back. Sorry, friends. I just went blank for a second. Um, when we live in society, like the truth is, in reality, if we work for somebody else, oftentimes we have to work in teams and work as a team, and we have to figure out answers. And life is not a closed book
Right.
test. But yet that's how we test kids, which is very unnatural, because the reality is, when we get into life, if we need to find something out, if we don't know the answer, we find a way to go figure out the answer. And we work with other people doing it. It's not all by ourselves perpetually in a vacuum, which is what we end up doing with the kids, like in the testing situation and all these,
Yeah.
all these things. Like
Right.
we go to people, we work together. We're communal creatures. We're meant to be with other
And
people.
isn't it
So
ironic?
sorry that I had that
Yeah.
little.
It's ironic though, because I don't know about you, Janae, but I for sure confess that in the classroom, I know the words came out of my mouth. We're not here to socialize.
Yeah.
Isn't that
Well,
ironic?
and I chuckle too, because I was a theater
Oh,
teacher. And so I'd be like, we're not here to socialize. Okay. And now work in your acting companies and
yeah.
socialize,
It's so funny.
but
Yeah.
I did feel bad. I have to share an experience with, when I was teaching in the classroom. I remember one time I had, for eighth, because I taught middle school. So eighth period, I had a doctor's appointment, but I didn't want to get a substitute and use up one of my sick days for a substitute. And I talked to the principal about it, because I'm like, it's the last hour of the day. And she said, oh, see if there's a teacher who could do an off period for you. It's their off period, and they could just sub for you, and then you could, take turns. So I found a seventh grade science teacher that I was friends with, and she's like, oh, I don't have an eighth period. It's my prep period. So, but I've already got everything planned for tomorrow already. So I'll come in and sit in your classroom. And I said, it's really easy. They all know what they're working on. You just have to rotate them every 5 minutes. Like it's going to be super easy. So the fascinating thing that happened was, I came back the next day and she found me. We had the same lunch, 5 minute lunch
Yeah.
period. And, and she said, I have to tell you, my kids come to my classroom. They sit at their desks. I do my thing. And she was a great science teacher. I mean, like, just, I really respected her as a science teacher. And she said, but I don't really know these kids. And I didn't realize how little I knew them until I watched them in your classroom doing their scenes together and laughing and talking. She's like Austin, he is so funny. And I had no idea what a big personality he has. And he's adorable. And I was laughing so hard. And this child, I didn't know. And because of the nature of my subject, she was always worried about, okay, we have to hit standardized testing and everything, because I'm a core teacher and I was not a core teacher. But she's like, I got to see these kids, like their real personalities come out. And she's like, and now I want to change the way I teach, because I don't see them.
Yeah.
And because they don't socialize in the classroom, and they don't, they don't do things. But it's true. But even then, as a theater teacher, I'm like, guys, we are not here to socialize. We're here to do theater. So let's get started and get in your groups and
Right. I
socialize.
know. It's so funny.
But
Yeah.
the core teachers couldn't, they couldn't do that, because they're like, we have to get through this material or else
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm in trouble. So
Yeah.
anyway, let's talk. Sorry to do a tangent for a second. Let's talk a little bit about going into evaluating. So I just want to explain for you listeners, most states in the United States, I can't speak to other countries, but most states in the United States have a requirement that you have to do some sort of national standardized testing every so many years. It depends from state to state. Some it's every year, some it's starting in my state, it's third grade, all the odd grade years. So third, fifth, seventh, ninth, 11th. You have to do a form of standardized national testing. Now, in 23 of the 50 states, you can do evaluations in lieu of state testing, which our first year of homeschooling, we did a national standard. We did the California Achievement Test. My kids did great on it, and I was, but it took forever. It took like 5 hours per child is what it ended up being, and I was allowed to proctor it because I'm a licensed teacher in Colorado. But I was really annoyed by how long it took. So then I decided to look into the evaluation route, which is how I met you, Kim. Um, and so let's talk a little about the evaluation route. And you, as an evaluator, you are a licensed evaluator in the state of Florida and Colorado. You are also licensed in California, but you don't do evaluations in California, and you're looking to get licensed in other states to do evaluations. Talk about that process, what that is, and what you look for as an evaluator.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. In the states that allow evaluations in lieu of testing, you need to be typically a licensed teacher in that state. So I had started in California, and then I transferred my license to Colorado. It was good that I had gotten my original license in California because they have what's called reciprocity with pretty much everywhere. And so there's a whole bunch of hoops I have to jump through, and I have to keep it current, and each state has different requirements. But regardless, and I did the same thing for Florida, got my license here. It's just a regular teacher's license, right? And so there are some states, from what I understand, that it just has to be a licensed teacher. So I'm going to be doing some more research into that. But typically, you need to be licensed in the state that you're working in, right? So what happened was my kids were about, I don't know, 8 or 10, something like that. And I realized I was reading through the law, and I read this tiny little sentence in the middle of the Colorado law that it was talking about the testing. And it said, they must take the test every other year starting in third grade or be evaluated by a qualified person. And I was like, what does that
What
mean?
does that
Read a
mean?
little further, right? And so, long story short, I did a lot of research. I couldn't find any evaluators to ask questions at the time. And I did tons of internet research, as much internet research as you could do back in the day. And I found a few little things here and there that I was able to piece together. I don't know for sure, but I think I was one of the first evaluators in the state of Colorado. And I started in 2010. So somebody might come and they might be saying, oh, no, I was doing that back in the 90s. I have no idea. All I know is I couldn't find anybody else at the time. So I thought, okay, I'm going to start this business. And at first I was like, I just want to help homeschoolers. And my husband said, you could probably turn that into a business and, get some gas money and some coffee money. I was like,
Yeah.
okay, that's fair. But at the same time, my heart is like, I know my people, right? So many of us are single income or large families. And so I definitely knew for sure I wanted to keep it affordable. And my primary goal was to to help families obey the law, because I think that's important, that we need to do that.
Yeah.
But also be very encouraging to the families and cheer them on, help them out where they need some help. And, I really had the blessing of having that training with working with that charter school just not too long beforehand. So I thought, this is something that I can do. And so I just slowly started getting my name out there, just talking about it in the Facebook groups and things like that. And it slowly has kind of grown over the years. And so the other nice thing about the Colorado law is that I just need to verify that the students are making progress commensurate with their own ability. In other words, they don't have to be matched up with state third grade standards precisely. It's completely different from testing. What I'm doing is I'm looking more at the whole child. What are you learning? What is your goal, your pathway, whatever the age is? What are your learning struggles? What are your learning strengths? And are you making progress in those areas? There you go. You're making progress. And very, very rarely, I can count on one hand with probably 3 fingers the times that I have run across families where I thought, wow, they need to work a little harder here because this is not great. But the vast majority of homeschool families are so passionate about their children, their children's education, and doing it really, really well, that my job
Mhm.
is honestly, it's just, it's fun. It's a joy. It's encouraging. It's exciting. I love my job. It's just so fun.
Mhm.
I remember the time when I think it was Joshua that had done your son, that had done
Yes.
the stuff where you make the blades, the bladesmithing, right?
Oh, yeah, the blades. Yeah, he had made a Viking
Yes, yes.
knife and an
And
axe.
at the
Yeah,
time, I had just been watching, there's that TV show about that with my husband and
the
my
forged in
sons. And
fire.
I came out, I said, "You are never going to believe this kid I was just evaluating is doing bladesmithing." So, it's so many fun. I've met so many fun families doing so many fun things. And I get to look and say, wow, this is great. Cheer you on. Here's your piece of paper. Turn it in. Go along. Be happy with your life. So it's good.
Well, I must say, so when we decided to try the evaluation
Yeah.
route, um, and again, as a having been a classroom teacher and having proctored standardized testing, I knew it wasn't going to tell me anything. And legally, because I'm a licensed teacher here in Colorado, I don't have to test my
Right.
kids. But I felt like I wanted that extra, like I just want to know from a third
Yeah.
party that we were on the right track, that it wasn't just me that is like, okay, we're doing good.
Yeah. And we talked
But I
about that.
remember being so scared.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I remember being so scared that, like meeting with you, I'm like, what is she gonna say? My kids were really worried. Like Joshua was like, it was our second year homeschooling. He had done the standardized testing the year before. I was like, I think we're gonna try this every year.
Yeah.
Now I don't. I'm like, nah, every other year is fine. But Joshua was nervous too. And he's like, what is she gonna ask me? And this is really scary. And then when we came in and you just started like really talking to him about what he loved, and it shifted from being really nervous and scared. And normally he doesn't get really scared over things. He's got a big personality, but shifting from I'm scared to, oh my gosh, and now this can be a talent
Yeah.
show. And I'm going to show you everything. And what I did, I don't think I told you this the first time, but one of the other kids was watching and we're like, can I show what I can do? I'm like, it is not your turn. And Jacob was like, I can play the piano. No, I was like, Jacob, go in the other room. This is not your time. He's like, but I would really like to show her the piano. I'm like, get in there. And suddenly they thought it was a talent show,
Yeah.
because they were so excited to share all the things that they had worked so hard on and were so proud of.
Yeah.
And number one, kudos to you because you put them in ease right
Oh, good.
away to make them feel like I can share the things myself. Um, but also as a mom, I stepped back and it was a relief for me to go, oh wow, my kids have learned so many things.
Yeah.
Granted, a lot of it's out of the box, like
Mhm.
making a Viking knife, but but they but they came away feeling like, wow, look what I did. And then I went, okay, so their education's going to look different, and it's okay.
Yes.
And it's okay that it looks different.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely.
So let's talk about, what do you look at the whole child then as you do evaluations. And now, so you've done evaluations a few times for us, because I after meeting with you that first time, I'm like, I will not ever go back to standardized testing
Yeah.
again. We're done with
Yeah.
that. Cost wise, it's similar
Yeah.
cost. But what are some of the things that you look for at various ages for the younger kids? Like in Colorado's third grade is when you start, versus some of the older kids. What do you look for?
So usually I start by asking for math and language arts because they're
Mhm.
foundational and because they kind of match up with maybe what they would be doing in the standardized testing. It just makes things, people understand that, they understand. I don't know. It's very common. They have usually they have those samples on hand regardless. And it might be workbook pages, super easy to get for math and language arts. Sometimes they'll show me well, here's the table of contents, and this is how far we went. I really believe in parents, and I really like to have a dialogue with the parents, especially in the lower grades. Tell me what you guys have been working on. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a big fan of putting kids on the spot per se. I used to have it when I very first did this. I had them read to me, and if you've got a great reader, that's wonderful. But so many kids were so stressed out about that, and I thought this is not even a good representation of how well they can read, because they're nervous, right? So I stopped doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Don't do that anymore. I haven't done that forever. But I'll say, give me some samples from the beginning, the middle, and the end of the school year, and so I can just see you've gotten from, like, I don't know, you've gotten from doing addition and subtraction here. Oh, look, in the middle of the school year, you went to double digits. And at the end of the school year, maybe you're starting your times tables. Great, you're making good progress. And I get to cheer you on. Reading, I'll say, what kinds of things have you been reading? Sometimes, um, have you gone from the Dr. Seuss up to Amelia Bedelia? That's great progress. And so those are the kinds of things that I'm looking for there. Some families don't happen to have, for whatever reason, they don't have those specific subjects at hand. And so they say, well, can I show you this other thing that my child has been learning? Like, they're really passionate about the Revolutionary War. And I'll say, well, tell me what you've been learning. And they'll just verbally tell me, oh, did Benjamin Franklin did this or that, or Thomas Jefferson did this or that. And then I can tell, simply because I've been around a lot of kids for a lot of
Been around the
years.
block a few times.
Yeah, a lot of years. I can tell clearly this child has been studying, and they have been learning things and making progress at their level. So sometimes I have kids who are, they're kids who have severe learning struggles. And so
Mm-hmm.
maybe what they're doing this year is they are learning their colors, and that's okay. I'm allowed to do that.
Yeah.
So, or the flip side, maybe you have a super advanced child. Um, I've worked with kids, a 12-year-old that was doing college math, and I just sat there
Mm-hmm.
flabbergasted, but got to cheer her on, and it was very fun, very exciting, and everything in between. And so that's what I look for. And then with the high school, middle school's kind of like, it's basically the same thing. I'm just looking for, are you making some progress? Because, there's so much going on in a middle schooler's head, right? And their bodies. I love middle school. It's great. And then high school, you can tell the ones that are more serious, they're excited to tell you, okay, this is what I'm learning about, whether it's the traditional path or not. Maybe they're doing
Mm-hmm.
YouTube videos and learning how to do videography and things like that. Or maybe it's a more traditional route. Either way, no matter what, I'm looking for progress. And I'm looking,
Yeah.
is this child making an effort to learn something in at least a
Mm-hmm.
couple areas? The law doesn't even tell me exactly what I have to look for. It just says, is this child making progress at their own level? So I have a ton of freedom, which is great. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why I like to spend time getting to know the kids a little bit, hear from them. What are they passionate about, interested in? What do they want to tell me? What have you been reading? That type of thing. Um, Sometimes, and this is a little bit of a bunny trail, that sort of circles back a little bit with my own life. Sometimes you've got situations where there's trauma involved, right, in the family. Like, somebody in our family, for example, my husband had brain cancer. He's a long-term survivor, in grace of God, but that
Mm-hmm.
really affected our family tremendously. And pausing for a second to even go back to when I was in the classroom as a very, very young, I think it was my first year teaching. I had a child, who there was some trauma in the family. And my thought was, well, this child probably just needs a distraction, and I should give her, more work or expect the best out of her. And it was a bad choice. And I caused, sadly, to my chagrin and everything, I caused more problems than I fixed. And I had to learn that. And so, I asked for forgiveness. We worked that out. And I was able to come around inside and learn how to best support her. So nowadays we use the term, trauma informed. I don't know that we really
Mm-hmm.
use those words back then. But then flash forward to my own kids. when my husband was first diagnosed, they were 7 and 9. And
Mhm.
I thought for about 30 seconds, should I put them into a classroom? Because we know what we're heading into, right? We're heading into surgeries, chemo, blah, blah, blah. And then I thought, no, because if I do that, I'm going to be at the mercy of somebody else's schedule, somebody else's,
Mhm.
requirements, somebody else's timeline, things like that. So I decided to keep him home, and we had great support from family, friends, grandparents that came in. And some days, math was a game of Monopoly with grandma. Some
Mhm.
days, science was watching a science video with grandpa. So if I had been working with, an evaluator, I would have wanted to share with them, look, here's what's happening in our lives.
Yeah.
This is big. And I know from experience from other people's kids and now with my own kids that you can tell them, 3 plus 3 is 6 today, and tomorrow they might say, I have no idea what you just said. Because, obviously their minds
Mhm.
are going to be all over the place with things. And so I think being able to speak into that authentically and with compassion is maybe something that I can bring to the table and that I really look for
Yeah.
with my families and my kids. So I watch for those types of things as well. Is there anything else I need to know that would help? And try to work with those
Mhm.
needs.
I love that. Well, and I even think when I look at the school system, when a child's going through trauma, I know so many teachers try to do the best that they
Yeah.
can. A lot
Yeah.
of times they don't know,
Right. Right.
and they're trying to teach all of these other kids, and so physically they're not capable of meeting the needs of everybody all of the time, just because they're one person
Right.
that spreads so thin. But I a few months ago I was on Facebook, and somebody had anonymously posted that she and her husband were going through a divorce because of infidelity,
Mm-hmm.
and she said, I'm debating, do I send my kids back to school? My 16-year-old daughter won't stop crying, and I think maybe it'd be a distraction,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not capable of really doing school right now. And ultimately, she posted later, we decided to keep them home while he moves out, and all the things going on. And I thought to myself, and she did say, she said, all I've been doing is every day we've been watching movies, and I've just been hugging my kids.
Yeah.
And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, that's what they need,
Yeah.
right? They're going through all of this hard, and you're going through this hard. And she was able to just put her arms around her kids and meet their needs right where they were, at a very difficult, traumatic experience for the whole family. And some might disagree and be like, no, they should be in public school. But no, like, what do their little hearts, their little minds, their little spirits, what do they need? Well, at that moment, they needed their mom to put her arms around them and say, everything's gonna be
Yeah.
okay, and we're gonna figure this out. And we're gonna pick up the
Yeah.
pieces together, and here we are, and love on those kids.
Yep.
I don't,
Precisely.
again, I didn't know who she was. I didn't, but that mom instinct in me went, oh no,
Mm-hmm.
you just met the needs of those kids and helped prevent any more trauma from going on for
Absolutely.
them.
Which is exactly what we were thinking. We wanted to keep them close so that we could keep an eye on their hearts the best that we could. And not that we did everything perfect. We made some mistakes along the way that we've, had to continually, it's a big deal. You work through things
Mhm.
for a while, but absolutely. And I can tell you too that there's going to be a side of you, like probably that mom there was to me. Oh my goodness. And people that I've talked to, you think, oh my goodness, they're going to be behind, which is always, well, behind
Yeah.
who, right? But
Yeah, and
yeah,
what?
and what? Yeah. But I'll tell you, they both my sons graduated from college with honors. One of them was overseas, um, and are married and living great lives with great jobs, So they certainly,
Mhm.
caught up, use the little air quotes there.
Right.
So I think really what is most important, that's what you come down to for sure.
Mhm.
It's your relationship with your children, your your faith, your family, that comes first. Academics, okay,
I love it.
after that.
Well, and I love how you said too, like, during that whole time, that there was days that playing Monopoly was enough.
Right.
And that's probably exactly what they needed. Or watching a video with grandma and grandpa was enough. And I love that you were focusing on their hearts at that time. Like what exactly do they need right now? Well,
Yeah.
they don't need they don't need to learn about mitochondria right this second,
No, they probably
like
won't remember it anyway. That's the thing. So, yeah,
so, but they will remember the time with grandma and
that's
grandpa,
they do.
you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they remember that their hearts were being taken
Yep.
care
They
of.
were
So I
loved.
love that.
Yep. Hmm.
Hmm. Thank you for sharing that. Wow. What advice? Well, before we go on to advice you'd give parents, you currently are working with an umbrella school in Colorado.
Yes, I work.
Um,
Yes, go ahead.
yeah, please. And tell me a little bit about what you're doing with the umbrella school, as well as the name of your company, if anyone is interested that is in Colorado and
Yeah.
Florida.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, so I do both. I work independently. It's
Hmm.
Mosaic academic evaluations and consultations, but I kind of drop that off because it's a mouthful. And I kind of combined for the website, I combined it to MosaCAD, Mosaic
Hmm.
Academy. Early on, I was working with one of my friends. We kind of started our own little co-op early on. One
Hmm.
of my mom's friends, one of those moms, and we started our own little school, and we decided to call it Mosaic because it takes all different kinds of people and it comes together to make this beautiful picture, right? That's what was in our heads. So anyway, that
I
stuck.
love it.
And so yes, so on Facebook, I've got probably 3 different Facebook pages just so people can find me, but it's Mosaic Evaluations, Kim Almas, and I think I have one that's specific to Colorado and one that's specific to Florida. But the main one is the Mosaic Academic Evaluations, Kim Almas. And
And I'll put your link in the show notes as
oh,
well.
thank you,
So
thank you.
anyway, continue on.
And then about a year ago, one of the umbrella schools said they were looking for someone to do their evaluations, and it was Statheros, and which a lot of people have seen. They pop up in a bunch of different Facebook groups as well. And in the advertisement, it said you can still, if you're an evaluator, you can still keep your own company. And
Hmm.
we just need somebody to do our evaluations for our families as well. And I thought, well, that sounds interesting. And so
Yeah.
we got to talking and we got to know. And the owner of the school is Colleen, and she just very passionate. Colleen Prain, she's very passionate about homeschooling well, and also was very so easy to work with, like wanting to encourage me to build my own business, while at the same
Hmm.
time, I'm helping her grow her business as well. And she's really, like I said, on top of things as far as umbrella school, what the Colorado law is, what she provides. There's a couple other coaches on the team, um,
Hmm.
Stacy and Michelle, and they both do the coaching. Stacy does transcripts. They're beautiful transcripts. If you're looking for a private school transcript, that would be a nice thing to do. And they have a DIY thing that you can pick up on their website as well. So I really appreciate the opportunity to do that. And then also with Statheros, they have a subtitle, The Umbrella School, which is pretty easy to remember. Um,
Love it.
we also have a um, private Facebook group and another podcast called The Essence of Homeschooling, where we just chat amongst ourselves, homeschoolers, just about what is the essence of homeschooling, what are some tips and
I
tricks,
love
and we
it.
have those kinds of conversations. And so it's been a very good opportunity. So, and then of course every other year I have a lot more. My workload doubles every other year because my Czech families show up every other year, which is the biggest homeschool group in
Hmm.
Colorado. So, and they're wonderful too. So I've been able to meet and get to know a lot of different people from a lot of different umbrella schools, and everybody has their little niche. And
Hmm.
but what we have in common, I think, is that we want to we love our kids and we want them to love to
Yeah.
learn and learn how, love learning how to learn. So it's a good field.
I love it. Last bit of advice that you'd give to new homeschool moms or people seriously thinking about homeschooling, what would you say?
Yeah, and I was glancing over at my notes because I thought, what tips would I give people? And I think the first one is to think of homeschooling. This is probably really foundational, right? Think of homeschooling as a lifestyle. This is not school at home.
Hmm.
This is a lifestyle of learning. And that's why a lot of times people will say, well, the law says you have to have 4 hours, and how am I going to get that in? Well, that's not how it works, right? It's an average. And I'll tell you, I even learned that going back to when I was working for the charter school in California, public charter school.
Hmm.
It's an average. And so, if you think of homeschooling as a lifestyle, then life is school. So that's probably my biggest word of advice to new families. And then your faith in your families come first, and then your academics, and be super intentional with that. Just don't grab stuff willy-nilly, but just think about what is my child's learning style. And even as a classroom teacher, I didn't realize I didn't know my child's learning style until I really started working with him, my oldest. And then I started paying more attention. So learn about that. Trust the process. I think I mentioned that before too. Get in community with other homeschoolers if you can. Even if it's one day a week, even if it's just like, I've seen this, it's been great. I've seen this so much lately in the Facebook groups. Someone will say, I'm going to be at the park on Thursday. Anybody else want to join me? And it's a good way to get to know other homeschoolers. I mean, do it safely, right? Be smart about it. But
Right.
That's a big tip. And then don't let your curriculum drive the bus. One of my favorite things
Love that.
to say.
Yeah.
Do what works best for your own child. And we want to work ourselves out of a job. So that's part of teaching our children to love learning how to learn what they want to know. And so work yourself out of a job, teach them how to make a planner, check things off, whatever that looks like, on a whiteboard or a journal, whatever, on their computer, piece of scrap paper. And then finally, begin with the end in mind. Who is this person that you think, they are created to be? And talk with your kids, especially the older they get. What are their passions? What are their interests? And help them reach those goals, So my two boys are just polar opposite, but that's okay. That's how God made them, right? And so they are becoming who they were created to be. And so if I can be someone that gets to come alongside and coach them and help facilitate that, I mean, that's just the best thing in the world. So, but relationships, super important, and guard your homeschool freedom.
I love it. I love it. Kim, thank you so, so much for taking the time today and coming on. I know it was a trial. We actually tried recording this a couple of weeks ago and had all sorts of technical difficulties. And then we were supposed to do it yesterday. And then I had all this family in town. And so I appreciate you taking the time and rescheduling when we've needed to, and sharing your insight and wisdom and your experience with us. Thank you so, so much. All of your contact, I'm going to put Kim's contact information in the show notes. So if you have questions or want to get a hold of Kim, we'll have that for you. In the meantime, mamas and papas, grandmas and grandpas, you are doing so much better than you think you are. And just remember, you've got this. We'll talk next week.
Thanks, Janae. Bye.
Thanks, Kim.
If you enjoyed this today, please like and subscribe. You could also join our private Facebook group at School to Homeschool, or sign up for our newsletter at www.schooltohomeschool. Have a great day.